Ladies and gentlemen, there's something powerful about a woman who knows what to walk away from. A woman who has learned, often through suffering, that not everything deserves her attention, her energy, or her sacrifice. There is wisdom in knowing what to avoid, what to step back from, what to refuse, what to walk away from without looking back. And yet, so many struggle with this because they believe that to be good, to be worthy, to be loved, they must accept everything that comes their way, every relationship, every burden, every obligation. But that's not strength. That's self-betrayal. A woman who does not know when to say enough will find herself trapped in cycles of pain that serve no purpose. So today we are going to uncover the 3 things a wise woman never allows in her life. These are not just strategies, they are rules for survival in a world that will take everything from you if you let it. You must become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, because the cost of ignoring these lessons is far greater than the temporary discomfort of enforcing them. If you want to live a life of respect, strength, and peace, you must learn what to let go of. And once you do, you will never look back. There is something deeply destructive about remaining in relationships that drain your energy, violate your self-respect, and make you doubt your own worth. And yet, people do it every day. They stay with those who belittle them, betray them, manipulate them, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of habit, sometimes because they have convinced themselves that suffering is the price they must pay to be loved. But that is a lie, and it is one that destroys far too many lives. A wise woman understands this. She sees the patterns that others ignore. She listens to the small voice inside her that says, "This is not right. This is not how I should be treated." And most importantly, she acts on that knowledge. The truth is, human beings are creatures of habit. If you allow someone to mistreat you once, they will do it again. If you tolerate disrespect, they will push the boundary further. And if you stay silent when you should speak, you send the message that your feelings, your needs, your dignity, none of it matters. But it does matter. More than you can possibly imagine. And the sooner you recognize that, the sooner you will free yourself from relationships that have no place in your life. Now, what does this actually look like? How do you identify relationships that are toxic, manipulative, or harmful? It starts with patterns, not apologies. When someone hurts you, they will often say they are sorry. They will promise to change. They will ask for another chance. And many people fall into the trap of believing that words are enough. But words mean nothing without action. If someone truly respects you, they will change their behavior. If they don't, they won't. It's as simple as that. And yet many struggle to leave because they tell themselves a different story. They convince themselves that it's not that bad, that everyone has flaws, that maybe it's my fault. This is where the danger lies, because the more you excuse, the more you tolerate, the harder it becomes to see just how much you are sacrificing. Over time, you become desensitized to the disrespect, to the small betrayals, to the constant disappointments. And before you know it, you have settled for a life that is far less than what you deserve. So what is the alternative? It is strength, clarity, boundaries. It is the refusal to accept anything less than what you know deep down is right. This is not arrogance. This is not selfishness. This is self-respect. And it requires a level of discipline that most people are unwilling to develop. Because walking away is painful. It requires you to admit that someone you cared about, someone you invested in, is not who you thought they were. It forces you to face loneliness, uncertainty, and the fear of starting over. But what is the alternative? Staying in a relationship that makes you feel small. That drains you. That leaves you questioning your own value. That is not love. That is self-destruction. A wise woman does not tolerate this. She does not engage in relationships that leave her exhausted, anxious, or resentful. She does not entertain those who treat her as an option. She does not stay where she is not valued. And when she recognizes these patterns, she does not argue, she does not beg, she does not hope for change, she leaves. But this is not just about romantic relationships. This applies to all relationships, friendships, family, professional environments. The people you surround yourself with will shape you in ways you do not even realize. If you are constantly around those who complain, who gossip, who bring nothing but negativity, what do you think will happen? It will wear you down. It will shape your thoughts, your emotions, your outlook on life. You must be selective. You must ask yourself, do the people in my life make me better, or do they drain me? And if the answer is the latter, you must be willing to let them go. Now, some will say this is harsh, that relationships require effort, that people make mistakes. And this is true. No one is perfect, but there is a difference between someone who makes mistakes and someone who is a mistake in your life. A relationship should not be a battle for survival. It should not require you to constantly defend your worth. It should not leave you feeling worse about yourself than when you started. If it does, it is not a relationship worth keeping. A wise woman understands this. She does not hold on to what is broken simply because she is afraid to let go. She does not stay in places that hurt her just because she has invested time in them. She does not lower her standards to keep people in her life. Instead, she recognizes that the cost of staying in toxic relationships is far greater than the cost of leaving them. She understands that she cannot build a meaningful life if she is constantly surrounded by those who undermine her. And most importantly, she knows that real love, whether from a partner, a friend, or a family member, does not require her to shrink herself to be accepted. So the question is not whether you are in toxic relationships. The question is, are you brave enough to walk away from them? Because if you are not, you will spend your life chasing the approval of people who will never truly respect you. And that is a tragedy, one that too many people experience because they lack the courage to choose themselves. But you have a choice. You always have a choice. And if you are willing to make it, if you are willing to value yourself enough to walk away from what is hurting you, you will find something extraordinary. Peace, freedom, self-respect, and once you experience these things, you will never settle for anything less again. Life is structured by habits, by patterns of behavior that become ingrained over time. And one of the most dangerous habits a person can develop is the inability to say no. People often assume that being agreeable, being accommodating, pleasing, easygoing is a virtue, and in some contexts it is. Cooperation is necessary for society, for relationships, for progress. But there is a dark side to excessive agreeableness, and that dark side manifests when a person consistently puts the needs of others above their own at the cost of their well-being. A wise woman understands this. She recognizes the importance of setting boundaries, of asserting herself, of refusing to let her time, energy, and emotional capacity be drained by those who take without giving in return. The inability to say no is not just a bad habit, it is a slow form of self-erasure. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you are allowing someone else's desires to override your own. You're signaling that your time is not yours, that your priorities do not matter as much as the expectations placed upon you. And at first, this might seem small. A favor here, a compromise there. But over time, it accumulates. It becomes a pattern. And before you know it, your entire life is shaped by the expectations and demands of others rather than by your own intentions. That is not generosity. That is not kindness. That is self-betrayal. Now, there is an important distinction to be made. Selfishness is not the same thing as self-respect. Many people fear that standing up for themselves, saying no, or setting boundaries will make them appear cold, detached, or unkind. This is not true. In fact, the most compassionate people are those who have the ability to say no. Why? Because they do not give out of obligation or guilt. They give because they genuinely want to. Their generosity is rooted in strength, not in fear. They help others without depleting themselves. They offer their time without sacrificing their dignity. That is the balance a wise woman must learn to strike. And yet, so many struggle with this. Why? Because they have been conditioned through culture, through upbringing, through relationships to believe that their worth is tied to how much they can provide for others. They have been taught that being accommodating is the same as being good, that being liked is more important than being respected. And so they tolerate mistreatment, they overextend themselves, they suppress their true feelings in order to maintain the illusion of harmony. But this is an illusion, and it is one that always comes at a cost. Resentment is the natural consequence of a life lived in submission to the demands of others. You see this in people who have given too much for too long. They become bitter, exhausted, emotionally drained. They lash out unexpectedly. They carry a weight of frustration that they cannot quite articulate. And the reason for this is simple. They have spent years, sometimes decades, neglecting their own needs, their own desires, their own voice. They have prioritized pleasing others over being true to themselves. And that kind of self-abandonment always leads to suffering. But the alternative is difficult. Saying no requires courage. It requires a willingness to disappoint people, to challenge expectations, to risk being misunderstood. Many avoid it because they fear rejection, conflict, or guilt. But here is the truth: saying no causes someone to withdraw their love or approval. Then that love or approval was conditional to begin with. That is not a real relationship. That is not mutual respect. That is control disguised as affection. And a wise woman does not engage in relationships that require her to diminish herself in order to be accepted. Now, this does not mean adopting an attitude of constant defiance. It does not mean rejecting every request, refusing every obligation, or disregarding the needs of others. Life requires compromise, cooperation, generosity, but it must be given freely, not under duress. A person who respects themselves knows when to say yes and when to say no. They are selective with their time, their energy, their emotional investments. They do not engage in obligations that drain them. They do not entertain people who take more than they give. And most importantly, they understand that saying no is not an act of rejection, it is an act of self-respect. Boundaries are not walls, they are gates. They do not exist to push people away, but to ensure that only those who are worthy of entry are allowed in. A wise woman sets these boundaries not because she is cold or unfeeling, but because she understands the value of what she has to offer. She knows that her kindness, her intelligence, her love, these things are precious. And if she gives them away freely without discernment, they will be taken for granted. That is the nature of human behavior. People do not value what is easily obtained. They do not respect what is freely given. They take advantage of those who refuse to stand up for themselves. So the question is, how do you learn to say no? How do you break the pattern of self-sacrifice and reclaim control over your own life? It starts with small decisions. The next time you are asked to do something that you do not want to do, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to or because I feel obligated? If it is obligation, consider what would happen if you said no. Would the world fall apart? Would people hate you? Or would you simply face a moment of discomfort? More often than not, the consequences of setting a boundary are far smaller than we imagine. The fear of saying no is always worse than the reality. And over time, as you practice this, you will notice something incredible. Your relationships will change. Some people, those who only valued you for what you could do for them, will disappear. Let them go. Others, those who genuinely care for you, will respect your boundaries. They will value you more. Because respect is born from strength, not from submission. And most importantly, you will begin to respect yourself. You will feel lighter, freer, more in control of your own destiny. Because that is what this is ultimately about: control over your own life. No one else is responsible for your well-being. No one else has the right to dictate your priorities. And if you do not claim that authority for yourself, someone else will take it. That is the reality. So you must decide, will you continue to live for the approval of others, or will you take ownership of your own life? That is the choice every wise woman must make. And it is a choice that defines the quality of life you will lead. People often underestimate the impact of the company they keep. Human beings are profoundly social creatures, wired to adapt to their environments, to the norms and values of those around them. And yet, too many people fail to consider just how much their friendships, relationships, and social circles shape their thoughts, their habits, and ultimately, their destiny. A wise woman understands this. She knows that the wrong influences, even those that seem harmless at first, can erode her confidence, her sense of purpose, and even her self-worth. It's not always obvious. Negativity, mediocrity, and dysfunction don't announce themselves with a sign. They creep in slowly, through subtle comments, through small compromises, through the gradual acceptance of less than what is deserved. Consider what happens when a person surrounds themselves with individuals who do not aim upwards, who do not strive for something better. It starts with simple things: a dismissive remark about ambition, a subtle suggestion that wanting more is selfish, a quiet disapproval when someone dares to step beyond the confines of the group's expectations. And over time, this influence compounds. A woman who once had vision, who once believed in her own potential, begins to hesitate. She second-guesses her aspirations, wonders if maybe she is asking for too much, worries that pursuing her own path will isolate her from those she cares about. And before long, she is not making decisions based on what is right for her, but based on what will keep her accepted, what will keep her within the limits of the familiar. But here's the hard truth. Not everyone in your life is meant to stay. Not everyone will support you when you begin to change. when you begin to take responsibility for yourself and demand better. Some will feel threatened. Some will project their own insecurities onto you, masking their fear with cynicism or mockery. Some will even attempt to sabotage your growth, not necessarily out of malice, but because your evolution forces them to confront their own stagnation. This is why a wise woman is selective with who she allows into her world. She does not keep people in her life simply because of history or obligation or guilt. She evaluates whether those around her contribute to her strength or diminish it. And when necessary, she lets go. This is not an easy process. It requires discomfort, confrontation, and sometimes even loneliness. But the alternative is far worse. The alternative is remaining trapped in relationships that do not serve you, absorbing the negativity of others, compromising your potential for the sake of keeping peace. A wise woman understands that true peace is not found in avoiding conflict, but in aligning her life with what is true, with what is meaningful, with what is best for her future. And this is not just about external relationships, it is also about the relationship one has with oneself. People talk a great deal about self-love, about confidence, about empowerment, but these things are not simply attitudes you can adopt overnight. They are built through the daily decisions you make, through the actions you take, through the standards you set for yourself. A woman who surrounds herself with negativity, who tolerates toxic relationships, who settles for less than she deserves, cannot truly love herself, because love, real love, requires action. It requires discipline. It requires the courage to walk away from what is familiar and step into the unknown in pursuit of something better. And yet so many are afraid to take that step. They are afraid to be alone, afraid of judgment, afraid of making the wrong choice. But here's something to consider. Every time you avoid making a decision out of fear, you are still making a decision. And that decision is to remain stuck. That decision is to allow external circumstances to dictate your path rather than choosing it for yourself. Growth is not comfortable. Transformation is not painless, but stagnation in the long run is far more costly. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means paying attention to the voices that influence you. It means evaluating whether your relationships push you forward or hold you back. It means recognizing that not all friendships are meant to last forever. That some people serve a purpose in a certain season of life but are not meant to continue the journey with you. It means setting standards for how you allow yourself to be treated and enforcing them, even when it is difficult, even when it means walking away from people who once meant everything to you. And most of all, it means developing the strength to stand alone if necessary. Because here's the reality: when you start demanding more, when you start refusing to settle, there will be pushback. Some people will not understand. Some will criticize. Some will try to make you feel guilty for wanting better. And in those moments, you will have to choose between their comfort and your own growth, between their expectations and your own potential, between staying small to keep others happy or stepping fully into who you are meant to be. A wise woman chooses growth. A wise woman chooses herself, not out of selfishness, not out of arrogance, but out of an understanding that she cannot pour into others if she is empty herself. That she cannot be strong for those who depend on her if she is constantly weakened by the weight of unhealthy relationships. That she cannot live a life of meaning, of purpose, of true fulfillment, if she does not take responsibility for her own well-being. And in the end, this is what it all comes down to: responsibility. Taking ownership of your choices, your relationships, your direction in life. No one else is coming to save you. No one else is responsible for your happiness, your fulfillment, your success. If you do not take control of your own life, someone else will. And if you allow yourself to be surrounded by people who do not believe in you, who do not encourage you, who do not inspire you to be better, then you are allowing your future to be shaped by mediocrity rather than excellence. A wise woman does not allow this. A wise woman chooses carefully. A wise woman protects her energy, her peace, her vision. And in doing so, she sets a standard not just for how others treat her, but for how she treats herself. Because in the end, the way you allow others to treat you is a direct reflection of how you value yourself. And that is something that no one else can define for you. It is something you must claim for yourself. There is a great responsibility that comes with wisdom, especially for those who have long enough to see patterns emerge, to recognize the consequences of poor decisions, and to understand the hidden cost of every compromise. A wise woman does not merely react to life she anticipates, she discerns and she chooses carefully. There are certain things she simply does not allow into her life, not because she is arrogant, not because she is rigid, but because she understands that every decision has consequences. Every relationship, every habit, every environment, she immerses herself and shapes her for better or for worse. And to ignore this truth is to invite unnecessary suffering. One of the first things a wise woman avoids is engaging in unnecessary conflict. This does not mean she is passive. It does not mean she tolerates injustice or shrinks in the face of adversity. Quite the opposite. She understands the power of restraint, of choosing her battles carefully. She knows that not every insult requires a response, not every challenge is worth her energy, and not every critic deserves her attention. There are people who thrive on chaos, who seek out arguments not for the sake of truth, but for the sake of dominance, for the thrill of seeing someone react. And engaging with such individuals is a waste of time, a waste of focus, a waste of the energy that could be spent building, growing, creating something meaningful. A wise woman does not let herself be baited into battles that do not serve her greater purpose. She does not waste her breath trying to convince those who refuse to listen. She does not exhaust herself in proving her worth to people who have already decided to misunderstand her. She knows that true strength is not found in endless confrontation, but in the ability to walk away, to disengage, to conserve her energy for the things that truly matter. And in doing so, she demonstrates a mastery over herself that few can attain. Another thing a wise woman avoids is relying on external validation for her sense of worth. The world is filled with voices that will try to tell a person who they are, what they should be, what is acceptable, what is desirable. And many fall into the trap of living according to these expectations, shaping themselves into a version that is palatable, that is pleasing, that earns approval. But this is a dangerous game because the approval of others is fleeting, conditional, and often comes at the cost of one's own authenticity. A wise woman does not seek her value in the opinions of others. She does not contort herself to fit into molds that were never meant for her. She does not depend on compliments, social media likes, or external praise to feel good about herself. She builds her self-worth on something far more stable, her own integrity, her own achievements, her own sense of purpose. She understands that no amount of admiration from others can compensate for a lack of self-respect. And so, she does not chase validation. She does not need to. She stands firm in who she is, and that alone commands respect. The third thing a wise woman avoids is allowing fear to dictate her decisions. Fear is a powerful force. It is what keeps people stuck in bad relationships and unfulfilling jobs and environments that drain them. It whispers worst-case scenarios, magnifies risks, and convinces people to choose comfort over growth. But growth is not found in comfort. Growth is found in the uncomfortable, in the uncertain, in the terrifying moments where one must choose between familiarity and possibility. A wise woman understands that fear is a natural response to the unknown, but she does not let it control her. She feels the fear and moves forward anyway. She takes risks, not recklessly, but with faith in her own ability to navigate whatever comes next. She does not allow fear of failure to keep her from trying, fear of rejection to keep her from loving, or fear of change to keep her from evolving. She knows that the greatest regrets are not in the mistakes made, but in the chances never taken, the opportunities missed, the life unlived. And because she refuses to be ruled by fear, she becomes something rare. She becomes a person of agency, a person who moves through the world with intention rather than reaction. She makes choices based on her own principles rather than the pressure of others. She creates her own path rather than following the one prescribed for her. And in doing so, she becomes truly free. But freedom is not without its cost. A woman who refuses to be controlled, who refuses to conform, who refuses to make herself small for the sake of others' comfort, will face resistance. Some will resent her strength. Some will question her choices. Some will attempt to shame her, to undermine her, to convince her that she is wrong for refusing to settle. And this is where many falter, where many retreat into the familiar, afraid of being seen as difficult, as selfish, as too much. But a wise woman understands that there is no virtue in diminishing oneself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her. There is no nobility in staying silent when one should speak, in staying put when one should leave, in staying small when one was meant to be great. The world will always have opinions. It will always try to dictate what is acceptable, what is appropriate, what is expected. But in the end, the only voice that truly matters is the one inside the one that knows what is right, what is true, what is necessary. And so she chooses, not based on fear, not based on approval, not based on obligation, but based on her own deep knowing. She walks away from unnecessary conflict. She stops seeking validation from those who do not matter. She refuses to let fear be the architect of her life. And in doing so, she steps fully into her own power, into her own wisdom, into the kind of life that is not dictated by external forces but shaped by her own hands. This is not an easy path. It requires courage, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to self-respect. But for those who are willing to walk it, the rewards are immeasurable. Because in the end, there is no greater freedom than living life on one's own terms, no greater peace than knowing that one's choices were made with wisdom rather than fear, and no greater strength than standing fully in one's own truth, unshaken, unapologetic, and absolutely certain of one's worth. Life is a series of choices, and every choice has a consequence. A person who refuses to acknowledge this lives in a state of perpetual victimhood, believing that the world is against them, that fate is cruel, that their suffering is unique. But suffering is not unique, it is universal. The difference between those who rise above it and those who are consumed by it is how they choose to respond. A wise person understands this. They recognize that they cannot control everything that happens to them, but they can control how they react, what they learn, and how they grow from it. And that realization changes everything. A wise woman in particular understands that self-respect is non-negotiable. It is not something she begs for, nor is it something she sacrifices in the hopes that others will return it to her. She demands it, first from herself and then from the world around her. She does not tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or dishonesty, not because she is cold or unyielding, but because she values herself too much to allow it. And that self-respect is what sets the foundation for the kind of life she will lead, the kind of relationships she will have, and the kind of energy she will allow into her space. There is a false narrative in society that tells people, especially women, that they must be agreeable at all costs, that they must shrink themselves to fit into the expectations of others, that they must be accommodating, self-sacrificing, endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient, endlessly giving. But that is a recipe for resentment. Because when a person gives and gives without boundary, without self-respect, they do not earn love. They earn exhaustion. They earn disappointment. They earn a life filled with people who take advantage of their kindness, who expect them to be endlessly available, endlessly understanding, endlessly accommodating while offering little to nothing in return. A wise woman avoids this trap. She understands that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the difference between being respected and being walked over, between being valued and being used, between being at peace and being in a constant state of emotional depletion. She knows that saying no does not make her difficult, does not make her unkind, it makes her strong. And that strength is intimidating to those who are used to control, to those who have built their power on the compliance of others. Strength, real strength, does not come from loudness or aggression. It comes from quiet certainty, from the ability to walk away from what does not serve, from the discipline to hold oneself to high standards, from the refusal to compromise one's values for temporary approval. And that strength is rare. That strength is what separates those who live with purpose from those who are merely surviving. But make no mistake, choosing to live this way is not easy. It requires sacrifice. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood, to be disliked, to be judged by those who do not understand the value of discipline, of restraint, of self-respect. It requires letting go of the need to please everyone, of the need to be liked by all, of the need to be constantly validated by external sources. And that is a difficult process because the human instinct is to belong, to be accepted, to fit in. But a wise woman does not sacrifice her dignity for the sake of belonging. She does not trade her authenticity for the comfort of acceptance. She does not compromise her values just to avoid discomfort. And because she refuses to do these things, she becomes powerful in a way that few people ever are. She becomes someone who cannot be easily manipulated, who cannot be controlled by guilt or fear, who cannot be swayed by flattery or false promises. She becomes someone who knows her worth so deeply that she does not need others to affirm it for her. And that kind of person is dangerous to those who rely on weakness, on insecurity, on doubt to maintain their own sense of superiority. The world does not always reward this kind of strength. It does not always celebrate those who refuse to conform. It often tries to break them down, to make them question themselves, to convince them that they are wrong for expecting respect, for demanding honesty, for refusing to tolerate anything less than what they deserve. But the wise do not listen to such voices. They do not allow external doubt to shake their internal certainty. They do not trade their self-respect for temporary comfort. And this is what ultimately sets them apart. They are not driven by the need for approval, but by the need for truth. They are not motivated by fear, but by principle. They do not seek easy paths, but meaningful ones. And in doing so, they build lives that are not dictated by circumstance, but by choice. There is a great cost to living this way, but there is an even greater cost to not living this way. Because every compromise, every moment of self-betrayal, every instance of tolerating what should not be tolerated chips away at a person's soul. It drains them of their energy, their clarity, their strength. It makes them question themselves, doubt themselves, weaken themselves. And before they know it, they have become unrecognizable to themselves, tired, bitter, lost. A wise woman does not allow this to happen. She protects her mind, her spirit, her peace. She is careful with who she allows into her life, with what she gives her attention to, with what she invests her time and energy in. She does not chase after those who do not value her. She does not waste time on situations that do not serve her. She does not entertain relationships that do not nourish her. And in doing so, she creates a life that is not only strong, but deeply fulfilling. The reality is that wisdom is not about knowing everything. It is about knowing what to let go of, knowing when to walk away, knowing when to stop fighting for things that are not worth the battle. And that kind of wisdom, once acquired, changes everything, because it allows a person to move through life with clarity, with purpose, with confidence, unshaken, unapologetic, and free. Life is filled with complexities, and the way a person navigates these complexities determines the quality of their existence. Most people do not realize that their lives are not dictated by some external force, but by the choices they make every single day. The world is chaotic, unpredictable, and often ruthless. It will test people in ways they never anticipated. It will throw obstacles at them, some of which will be overwhelming, seemingly insurmountable. But the real question is not whether adversity will come at will. The question is how a person will respond to it. And this is what separates those who live with strength from those who are constantly consumed by fear and regret. A person who understands their own value does not allow the world to dictate their worth. They do not look to others for validation, nor do they seek approval from those who have no place determining their self-worth. There are far too many people who live their entire lives as though they are waiting for permission to succeed, permission to speak up, permission to pursue what they truly desire. And that is a tragedy, because no one is coming to grant them that permission. The moment a person realizes that they are responsible for their own destiny, everything changes. They stop asking for validation, and instead they begin to demand from themselves the discipline, the focus, and the effort required to shape their own future. There is a reason why strong individuals are often misunderstood, why they are sometimes seen as difficult or intimidating. It is because they refuse to conform to what is easy. They refuse to take the path of least resistance. They hold themselves to a standard that others often find uncomfortable. And that is because true strength requires sacrifice. It requires the ability to stand alone when necessary, to walk away from what no longer serves, to maintain integrity even when it is inconvenient. But this is not an easy road. Those who commit to it will find themselves facing resistance at every turn. They will be criticized, judged, and sometimes even alienated, but this is the price of authenticity. A person cannot live for both approval and truth at the same time. They must choose. And those who choose truth will often find themselves walking a lonelier path. But that path is also the only one that leads to genuine fulfillment, to self-respect, to a life of meaning rather than mere existence. Most people avoid discomfort. They avoid the difficult conversations, the necessary confrontations, the hard choices. They tell themselves they are being kind, being patient, being understanding. But in reality, they are afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid of stepping outside the boundaries of what is expected of them. And this fear controls them, dictates their decisions, determines the course of their lives. But a wise person recognizes this fear for what it is, a cage, and they refuse to live inside it. When a person understands their own worth, they stop settling for less. They stop tolerating disrespect, manipulation, dishonesty. They do not allow themselves to be mistreated under the false belief that it is somehow noble to endure it. Strength is not endurance in the face of unnecessary suffering. Strength is the willingness to say this is not acceptable and to walk away when necessary. It is easy to convince oneself that avoiding conflict is the right thing to do, that keeping the peace is more important than standing up for oneself. But that kind of peace is an illusion. It is not peace at all. It is suppression. And suppression will always eventually turn into resentment. The person who suppresses their needs, their values, their boundaries in order to keep others comfortable will find themselves exhausted, bitter, lost. And by the time they realize it, they will have spent years of their life being someone they never intended to be. This is why discipline is so important. Not just discipline in action, but discipline in thought. The way a person thinks shapes their reality. If they believe they are powerless, they will be. If they believe they must always be agreeable to be loved, they will spend their lives bending to the will of others. But if they believe they have the right to stand their ground, to assert their needs, to build a life that reflects their values, then they will do exactly that. And this is where real freedom comes from. Not from external circumstances, not from waiting for the world to change, but from deciding that no matter what happens, one will hold themselves to a standard. That no matter how difficult the situation, they will not allow themselves to be diminished by it. That no matter what opposition they face, they will continue forward with clarity, with strength, with purpose. The world is full of people who are waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to recognize them, to save them, to make things easier. But those who wait are always at the mercy of external forces. They give away their power without even realizing it. And the longer they wait, the more they convince themselves that they have no choice. But they do have a choice. Everyone does. The only question is whether they will take it. Because at the end of the day, a person is responsible for their own life. No one else is. Not society, not circumstances, not fate. And once that truth is accepted, everything changes. There are no more excuses, no more waiting, no more blaming. There is only the decision to act, to rise, to take control. And that decision is the foundation of everything that follows. Life is not about waiting for the right circumstances or seeking validation from others. It is about taking responsibility for oneself, standing firm in one's values, and refusing to be diminished by fear or external pressures. True strength is not about avoiding conflict or keeping the peace at the expense of one's integrity. It is about having the courage to uphold one's standards, even when it is difficult. Those who choose this path may face resistance, but they will also find something far greater: self-respect, freedom, and a life of deep meaning. The choice is always there. Will you take it?